Ladies and gentlemen, hey yo, fellas, let's close out week 2 with some Monday Night Football. Massive favorites of the Green Bay Packers, a 30 implied total. The Lions are not even at a 20 implied total, meaning that the Packers are greater than 10-point favorites. They're double-digit favorites today in this one. We'll close out the week. Let us all say our thanks to Mr. King Henry, Derrick Henry. Hopefully many of you were able to late swap yesterday. If you saw your first lineups not doing too well, like a good amount of mine were because of Mr. Tyler Higbee, but Cup, right? Najee Harris had us there, gave us a pulse, and late swapping off of the Chris Carson, Keenan Allens to the Derrick Henry, Chase Edmonds. Went from a losing $3,000 day in DFS to profiting about $450. We will take it. We skated out of there. We move on. We say, we're good with the Sunday night slate. We're going to chill out, relax, max, all cool, eat some motherfucking fajitas, and now it's Monday Night Football. It's Aaron Rodgers, the GOAT, the man himself, coming off of the worst game potentially of his career. Definitely the worst loss of his career, and here we go. Let's smack around the Detroit Lions. Let's see what Detroit has to offer now with Jamal Williams out for this game with a concussion, with Khalif Raymond, a team that doesn't even have receivers to begin with. 2 of their top 4 leaders in routes run were a running back and a tight end. Their target leaders last week were 2 running backs and a tight end. They're not throwing to wide receivers, and now 2 of them are banged up. 1 out, 1 questionable. So there you go. We set the table. Hey, if you like this video at any point, there's $1 million to first place tonight, all right? I'm breaking it down for you. We're going to try and win $1 million, or split it, or do whatever you want to do. I don't care. Win a fucking dollar. If you win the $1 million, give me $1. I want a ring pop, whatever it might be. All right? Hit the subscribe button if you like this video. And bada bang, bada boom, let's get into it here. Look, these are going to be my interests. And there's not that many guys in play tonight. Like, the Packers run a pretty tight 3 to 4 wide receiver core, a pretty tight 2 running back core. If you're listening to anybody or you're looking at yourself at stat lines from last week from either of these games, don't throw them out the windows. We'll reference some of the stuff that was happening because some of it's important while the games were close. But the Packers didn't play any of their starters in the fourth quarter, so it might actually look like Kylan Hill is involved for his 14 snaps and a team high tied with Aaron Jones, 5 rushing attempts. That's not true. He's probably not going to play. Malik Taylor and Amari Rodgers ran some routes. They're probably not going to play. On the opposite side of that one, Detroit had guys running 40 and 50 routes in a much more neutral game environment. And when they're trailing, they're probably not going to run that many routes. They'll probably run 35 routes, maybe 40, not the 50 routes that you were seeing last week for some of these guys. So you have to put some context to the data. That is very helpful, but you also have to put some human reasoning behind it as to why some things were appearing the way they were. So we could start off on this one up top here with some of the Detroit Lions players that stand out to me. And like I said, there's not that. I think I have, as of right now, 19 players in a player pool. There's like 20 to 21 that you can try and convince me to actually be pretty invested in. So normally on these showdown slates, there's like 25, 26 guys. This is a little bit more compressed because of what the salaries look like and just in general how tight of a core the Green Bay Packers run. So it starts off with DeAndre Swift, who is questionable tonight, so we'll have to watch this, but he does find himself with a positive 44% run blocking advantage tonight. DeAndre Swift is basically my number 1 play from Detroit. Like, Jared Goff is my highest projected player at about 16 fantasy points on Patreon. My projections, ownership, the optimizer, a bunch of stuff, rankings for tonight down there, including the Discord access. So Jared Goff's my number 1 projected player, but Jared Goff is also significantly more expensive than Swift, $1,600 more expensive than Swift, and I only have him for like a point more. So Swift is my number 1 Detroit Lion, assuming he plays tonight. He was supposed to be limited week 1, right? Jamal Williams started, but he played 68% of the snaps. He ran a massive 41 routes in a game that they trailed by a lot, saw 11 targets and 18% target share, caught 8 balls, 65 yards, and a touchdown. But he also was the number 1 running back on the ground, as you would expect. But since they were saying, hey, he might not start this week, he ended up coming in that game and having 11 rushing attempts on the ground. Did not do too well. I mean, he had 39 rushing yards. His over-under props tonight, we'll talk about my props momentarily. His over-under props tonight are at 39.5 rushing yards. I'm kind of interested in that. The Packers' run defense was terrible last week. PFF says it ranks 13th overall because they were so good at tackling. But the Saints were doing whatever they wanted. Like, the ability to run the ball was there. They were milking the clock a ton. And if you watch that first and second quarter of that Saints-Packers game, it was just run the ball, hand it off, run the ball, hand it off. Jameis not throwing it all. Run the ball, hand off, throw to Juwan Johnson for a touchdown. So Swift is clearly in play. He actually is a fair price of $8,400 for somebody so involved in his offense. And now you go down. Now these guys are yeses. This will change probably before lock. I'll be live tonight, by the way, for this $1 million slate. We'll be live about an hour and a half before the game starts. There's Khalif Raymond, who is also questionable today. And he's probably going to see a matchup on the outside against both Jair Alexander and Kevin King. And I will not be shocked if the Packers, because Kevin King got torched again by Deontay Harris of all people last week. So that's now Scotty Miller and Deontay Harris and Kevin King's last 2 games getting torched for a deep touchdown that was important in the game. I would not be shocked if you saw Eric Stokes start to take over now. So Khalif Raymond in week 1, he ended up playing 75% of the snaps. And now with no Jamal Williams, he's going to operate potentially as the number 1 receiver on this team, which just sounds so gross. He ran 46 routes only behind TJ Hawkinson last week, and he caught 3 balls for 50 yards on 4 targets. The former Tennessee Titan, he'll be used downfield. I don't think he'll be used in the slot much. The price point is the reason why he's a yes here. He's $4,400 for a starting wide receiver if he plays tonight, assuming he plays. That will not get a Jair Alexander shadow treatment. Like, people are saying, but Marquise Callaway saw Jair Alexander last week. He saw him about a 30% of the time, right? It was because they ran the ball is why Marquise Callaway didn't succeed, not because Jair Alexander was shadowing him. That did not happen, right? Jair Alexander is fantastic, but Kevin King is probably the worst cornerback in the league on the other side, and he's going to get him just about equal amounts, if not more. So because of the price point, Khalif Raymond is in play, and that's kind of the story for these other guys too. Like Amon-Ra St. Brown, the rookie, he only played 50% of the snaps in the slot. Now he ended up running 45 routes because they played so many damn snaps because they were trailing from behind and it was catch-up mode and they were playing at a hurry-up pace and more so than they normally would. And now we'll get a matchup against Chandler Sullivan in the slot, who's just an okay slot cornerback. Some weeks he's fantastic. Some weeks he kind of makes these blunders that really are important for a team and are detrimental. He had 3 targets week 1, a 7% target share for the rookie St. Brown. He's no special athlete, a 4th-round pick. He doesn't have insane speed. He's just fine out of USC. At $2,600 or $2,400, he's in play, but I only have Amon-Ra St. Brown projected for about 6.2 points. But the reason why he's in play is because he's $2,400. He's cheaper than the kickers, he's cheaper than the defenses, and he's coming in with a similar point projection with an obvious higher ceiling if he finds the end zone. And then the final yes from the Detroit side of it, we can talk about Mr. Trinity Benson, who was a Denver Bronco, who this team basically signed for emergency reasons at the end. Once the camp cuts happened, Benson was cut, and then they signed him because they just needed a body. And then, oh look, Tyrell Williams goes down, and oh look, they don't want to keep Rashad Perriman. So now Trinity Benson is operating as potentially the wide receiver 3/4. It depends. It's like him and Quentin Cephas splitting the other outside wide receiver role right now. And last week you saw Benson, once Tyrell Williams, who played 39 snaps last week of the 92 Jared Goff snaps, Benson came in and he played 53% of those snaps. He came in and he ran 39 routes, which was basically more than you saw for Quentin Cephas. So he was operating kind of as this starting receiver on the outside. He saw 6 targets, which was solid, an 11% target share, but still 6 targets. If that translates to today, if Goff is only throwing 35 times in this game, you probably get 3 or 4 targets out of just a very, very cheap player. I mean, if you're looking at the price point here, you're looking at a $1,000 player who maybe runs 15 to 20 routes today on the outside, and that keeps him in play for a 2 to 3 reception game. He's got to be in play for me there. It's not sexy, but I do have him projected as it stands right now for around 6 fantasy points at just $1,000. And now we get to the Green Bay Packers, some actual players, some actual studs you want to play. And yes, this isn't going to shock anybody, but they're all damn expensive and they're all strongly in play. Davante Adams has the #1 matchup of any wide receiver this week, not just on this slate, not just this Monday slate, of any wide receiver on week 2. Davante Adams matchup this week against the Detroit secondary is #1. Jeffrey Okudah, their rookie draft pick from last year, top 5 pick, who was not good last year, who got burnt week 1, is now out for the year as well. And now that cornerback, who was not good, was potentially their best secondary player, and now he's gone. So they're going to be going with guys like A.J. Parker and Afido on the outside. This is by far the best matchup. Davante Adams only played 3 quarters last week. 3 quarters in which his team had 12 snaps before the final minute of the first half, and he still was able to produce 7 targets. He still had 5 catches for 56 yards. Those numbers probably don't seem that exciting to you, but based on the amount of snaps that they played, he basically played a quarter and a half of football last week, and he had a 56-yard game. He had 10.5 fantasy points. He was on pace for over 20 fantasy points. Davante Adams is my highest projected player on the slate by about 2 points. I have him for over 23 fantasy points. He is indeed one of the best, if not the best, captain option tonight. He's also indeed the most expensive player. That's just how this stuff works out. But he gets a matchup tonight against this secondary of Detroit that is absolutely brutal. It is absolutely terrible, and he's probably the best receiver in the league. Davante Adams stands out. Last week, 7 targets on a team-high 27 routes. Next up is his teammate Aaron Rodgers, who basically last week just played 40 snaps. He played 3 quarters. He said YOLO. He threw a ball deep. He apparently said on the Pat McAfee show that his first interception in the red zone, which kind of turned the game, it would have maybe made it 17-10 at that point coming out of the half, starting the third quarter in the second half, and he got hit in the nuts twice apparently, and he threw an interception, and then the rest was history in that game. It became terrible and onslaught. Gross. What are you going to do? You smack back with the Detroit Lions now. And I mean, he was absolutely brutal in that game. But this week he gets a number 28 ranked secondary. Even in that game, he had the number 2 pass blocking unit, and that's without David Bakhtiari, so that's good to see. Like, there's some narratives, oh, the pass blocking was bad. No, not at all. I mean, they just didn't have time. The first quarter was milked, and then he throws an interception, getting hit in the nuts twice, and then he just throws a YOLO ball downfield, and it's a good play by the safety, gets over to the other side of the field, intercepts the ball, and there's 2 picks, and the game's over. The stat line's disgusting. 15 of 28, 133 yards, and 2 picks. But now his player props are at about 280 passing yards in the over-under. A set 2 touchdowns right now. He's looking very good. He projects out for over 20 fantasy points for me. Aaron Rodgers is clearly in play. And then Aaron Jones, the other guy back here. Kylan Hill will not be playing that much. Aaron Jones in week 1 had 5 rushes for 9 yards. He ran 14 routes and caught 2 balls. That does not look good by any means. By any means what Aaron Jones did. But I'd like to share with you some of my props today, because some of my props are going to point out Aaron Jones and Davante Adams, who we just talked about. This is a $200 entry, so I have $200 on this props. You just have to get 2 out of 3 right to profit. If you get all 3 right, you get even more. This is on Prize Picks. Again, Many of you already play on PrizePicks. If you don't, use the free code. I know it's a Millie Maker. A lot of people will be watching this. If you use the code SAL on PrizePicks, you'll get a free bet up to $100. Take this one before the lines move. Take whichever one you want to. I have Adams over 85.5 yards. I have Adams projected for 97 receiving yards tonight. That's a clear yes for me. Aaron Jones over 16.5 receiving yards. We're talking about Aaron Jones, a man who last week basically played a quarter and a half of football based on the normal amount of snaps that he played, and he still had 2 receptions and basically got you to this number. Aaron Jones at over 16.5 receiving yards. I have him for 28.5 receiving yards this week. A massive over for me. And then Jared Goff, we're burying the lead a little bit here before we talk about Goff, but I have him under 252.5 receiving yards. This number is skewed upwards. It's skewed upwards because of what you saw Jared Goff do last week. He played from behind. He relied on his tight end and his running backs to get him to 338 yards on a terrible 5.9 yards per attempt. On a tackling team like the Packers that ranked number 1 in week 1 in tackling, they're not going to let these running backs go for the extreme yards after the catch. So Jared Goff under 252 yards. I like that one. You pair those three together, you take your bet, you take your free $Ruski bet, use the code SAL. Again, SAL, S-A-L on PrizePicks. Free bet up to $100. Limited time offer. There's $1 million up first tonight on DraftKings. Get the free dollars as well over on PrizePicks. And not only that, but Jones is going to have a positive 30% run blocking, 37% run blocking advantage this week. He had those 2 catches for 13 yards and basically a quarter and a half worth of snaps last week. Aaron Jones firmly in play. And now we really like these next players. Like Allen Lazard is so cheap. Allen Lazard is the potential Darius Slayton sneaky captain option. So is MVS, but Lazard's a little bit cheaper at 4,800. He was tied for the second most routes run on the team last week. He played last week while Aaron Rodgers was in the game. 93% of the snaps. He plays in the slot and on the outside. You saw MVS move into the slot a lot more last week than we saw last year. Yes, Randall Cobb is the number 4 receiver on this team. Cobb was not much involved. Allen Lazard is a much better player at this point in his career than Cobb. Lazard dealt with a core muscle injury for about 8 weeks to 10 weeks last year, both having surgery and the recovery and being limited from it. He saw 4 targets, caught 2 of them for 16 yards, but at just $4,800, this is a very strong spot for him against this terrible secondary. $4,800, he's more than in play as a captain. All 3 of the Packers wide receivers look like probably the best captain plays on the slate tonight. Aaron Jones is obviously in play there, but the 3 Packers wide receivers look like the best captain plays. One of them is Devontae Adams with the highest projection and the highest price. The other 2 guys are much more affordable. We finished up some of the yeses with a kicker in Mason Crosby. He's on a team that has a 30 implied team total. It's tougher to want to get to him with priority, but I have him projected for 9.5 fantasy points, which is the most out of anybody down here in like this $4,000 range. But when you have Allen Lazard in this price range, when you have AJ Dillon for cheaper, when you have all those Lions wide receivers who are going to be running 25 to 35 routes today for cheaper, it makes it a little bit more difficult to get to Crosby, but Crosby is going to be in line for a very solid game with a 30 implied team total. And then lastly, AJ Dillon is here who looks solid. He has that same fantastic matchup. I almost like his over rushing yards prop on PrizePicks. I'm close to taking it, but he has that same matchup against a number 31 run defense for Detroit that ranked number 29 or 30 in tackling week 1. Same positive 37% advantage as Mr. Aaron Jones. Last week, only 4 rushing attempts. Again, the game blew out. It was very slow paced. There wasn't a lot of plays in general. He ran 7 routes, which led to a reception on 2 targets. And he's just $3,000. And if you just look at this game, 30 implied team total. His team is 12-point favorites. He's probably going to touch the rock in this one 10 times on the ground and maybe 2 receptions. For $3,000 to get double-digit touches in a game for a guy who might have red zone usage and probably will, that's really good for AJ Dillon. And now we can close it up with some of our maybes. Look, Jared Goff at $10,000. Why would I choose Jared Goff when I could take Rodgers? Why would I choose Jared Goff when I could take Aaron Jones? Guys who I have projected for 4 to 5 to 6 to 7 more points than Jared Goff this week. I don't think Jared Goff's passing yards are going to be there. I think Jared Goff is very bad. He's not going to be able to rely on these running backs because San Fran last week was playing a soft zone up by so much to just scatter and get you 50-yard receptions. Jared Goff was abysmal week 1, 5.9 yards per attempt. Oh, he wasn't abysmal, Sally. He had 338 passing yards. Okay, on his true passer rating, on his true completion percentage, he had 3 touchdowns. Bad interception, right? These things are not something that I care about. It's his garbage time stats that Blake Bortles puts up. $10,000 Jared Goff is, in my opinion, the 33 fantasy points he put up week 1. It's going to be 40-50% owned, and I'll stay away from it. He's in play, but he's nowhere near a priority. Hockenson, the only reason why he's not a yes is Hockenson's numbers last week are going to look great. 8 catches, 97 yards, and a touchdown on 11 targets. Yeah, but it was only an 18% target share. This wasn't a 25 to 30% target share that we were hoping for as him being the phantom number 1 receiver. Now, maybe that can happen this week, but he ran 53 routes in a blowout. He's going to probably run this week 30 to 35 routes, which means he probably ends up seeing 7 targets, which 7 targets is very good, but if he has 6 catches for 50 yards and you're hoping for the touchdown, at $9,600, that's a little overpriced. Give me DeAndre Swift from this team. I'll pay up a little bit more and go get myself some Aaron Jones for only $800 more. I like Hockenson. He played 85% of the snaps week 1, but it wasn't as elite usage as it seems. He got there based on the fact that this was just a ton of overall plays in that game against San Francisco playing from behind. 18% target share is basically like a wide receiver 2 on most teams. It's not as appealing. He's an elite player. He's probably the number 1 receiver. He stays in play because of the touchdown upside. Jamal Williams is very close to a no for me. Gets the revenge matchup here for the Packers. He has that positive 44% run blocking advantage that you're going to see for Swift as well. But he only played 35% of the snaps last week, and he ran 20 routes. And on his 20 routes, he was targeted 9 times. A 48% target share or target rate is not going to continue. The NFL average is like 15%. So clearly, week 1 was an insane outlier. He had 9 rushing yards for 50. He had 9 rushing attempts for 54 yards and a touchdown. So this stuff is all going to look great. Oh, Jamal Williams, this looks great. He's fantastic. He's $7,200. If Jamal Williams was $5,000, I'd start to consider it. $6,000, I'm like, yeah, not really. $7,200, I'm looking at this like, okay, Jamal Williams had the outlier of all outlier performances last week. Running backs were targeted by Jared Goff 35.1% of the time. I think I can stay away from that price point of $7,200. Jamal Williams, as it ranks out right now for me, if I projected this by value, and this is including some of the guys who really aren't playing tonight, Jamal Williams ranks out for me on a slate where I have 22 players projected for at least 1 fantasy point. He ranks out as my overall number 17 play. It's not looking that great at this price point, even in the revenge matchup, if you will. Quintus Cephas is like the number 2 wide receiver on the outside, splitting time with Benson. He's a decent price point, but the problem is he's also $3,800 when Trinity Benson might be splitting that role 50-50 for $1,000. He'll see some Jair, some Kevin King, some Stokes. He played 35% of the snaps week 1 and saw 6 targets. So 6 targets on just his 24 routes run. That's a very good target rate of 25%. It's a little bit above average. So Jared Goff was throwing him the ball. 3 catches, 12 yards and a touchdown. The only reason why he's not a yes is he's more expensive than Amon-Ra St. Brown and Trinity Benson. He's more expensive than the 2 of them guys combined, and those guys are going to see similar to more usage than him. You'll start to get to the kicker from Detroit here. Some defenses that'll be in play. The Packers defense is in play. 5K, they look fine. And some final guys. Robert Tonyan, his price point's a little bit pricey here. Obviously, the touchdown upside keeps him in play, but he can't be a priority for me because he's just $6,400 when you get almost $1,500 or more cheaper is going to be Allen Lazard, who's going to have a better role. You can get way cheaper is going to be for 10 plus touches of A.J. Dillon. Robert Tonyan saw 4 targets. He played 28 snaps out of the Rodgers 40 snaps. So he was on the field about 70% of the time. He had a very good role here. He ran those 21 routes, 2 catches for 8 yards. He's in play at $6,400. Like if you're in that zone and you just have him, he's not really a captain option for me. 2 touchdown upside is in play, but it's obviously more in play for Aaron Jones and Devontae Adams, and probably even more in play for Allen Lazard. MVS is the final maybe here. He's close to a yes for me. He's definitely a captain option. I would rank probably the captain options from the Packers as of right now: Devontae Adams, Allen Lazard, and then MVS at the receiver position. He played 36 snaps, 86% of the time. He got a lot more slot usage on his 25 routes last week. He saw 6 targets, a 24% share. He was number 6 overall in air yards with 4 deep targets in week 1. So the role and the usage is fantastic. He's going to have 1 to 2 deep shots in this game against a bad secondary, so there's an opportunity for a 50-plus yard touchdown there. As the day goes on, he might become a yes for me. The problem is he's $5,600, $800 more than Allen Lazard, and I have Allen Lazard actually projecting for more fantasy points. About 8.5 fantasy points projected right now for MVS. Lazard about 9 fantasy points right now. And then that's where I'm at. We can close it up by talking about Randall Cobb, but his role's not that great. Randall Cobb didn't do anything until garbage time, where he saw a 32-yard reception from Jordan Love, not Aaron Rodgers. Randall Cobb last week, if we look at it, played just 15 snaps, and some of those snaps were in garbage time. So he played about 8 meaningful snaps when Aaron Rodgers was in the game from what I counted. He ran 11 routes in the game, and he only ran about 5 routes when Aaron Rodgers was in there. Everybody was saying, a 32-year-old Randall Cobb coming back to the Packers. No, they got him as just sort of a playmate for Aaron Rodgers in the locker room, a guy who can mentor Amari Rodgers, who he knows from when Amari Rodgers was a child. Randall Cobb is not going to be a major factor on this team long term. Now, maybe today against the Detroit Lions, in a game where they're blowing them out, Cobb gets fed a little bit more. He gets 3 or 4 targets, right? He has 3 or 4 receptions. Maybe he finds the end zone. So he's going to stay and play at $2,000. But give me Trinity Benson, give me Amon-Ra St. Brown, who are actually main pieces of their offense today. Whereas Randall Cobb is the wide receiver 4, and he's behind Robert Tonyan, and he's behind Aaron Jones as probably the 6th or 7th priority, even behind A.J. Dillon on this team. So that's where I'm at. That is a bunch of players. We just talked about 19 total position players, including the kickers. I don't have much interest in the Lions defense or Darren Fells, who just ran 11 routes last week. Maybe you see Geronimo Allison, who got signed to the practice squad, former Packer. Maybe with no Tyrell Williams, he'll be active, or the former Brown Kadero Hodge will be active. They're both $200. We can keep an eye on that around the lock time of the live stream for inactives and actives. But either way, they'll be like the wide receiver 4 on their team behind Hockenson and DeAndre Swift and Jamal Williams. They'll be like the 7th option, so I'm not really that enticed by them. Mercedes Lewis for the Packers is a run blocking tight end for the most part. So is Dominique Daffrey. Amari Rodgers and Malik Taylor only got their use in blowout run as the wide receiver 5 and 6 is on this team behind Tonyan, behind Jones and A.J. Dillon as well, so not much use. So there's 19 potential players in a player pool. We'll be live later today. $1 million is up for grabs on first place. The props that we're talking about, we got those 3 props. Use the code SAL. Again, take a second of your time right now. Open up prizepicks.com, use the code SAL, get your free $100, put that bet in, bada bing, bada bang, before the offer expires. Sign up on Patreon, where you can chat with me in the Discord, and we can talk about the projections, the ranks, the optimizer, the ways to attack this slate for tonight in more depth, answering your questions one-on-one in there. Thanks for tuning in. I'll see you on the next one. This cold is killing me, but the shirt, this polo, is pretty damn fresh. Peace. Peace out, gang.